The wind howled across broken mesa like a wounded animal. It clawed at the earth, lifting curtains of snow into the pale evening sky. Beneath that cold fury, a horse struggled against the drifts, its flanks trembling. Two figures rode, one old and bent, the other young and rigid with anger. Elias Turner's beard was white with frost, his breath ragged. He hunched in the saddle, clutching his coat tight. Beside him, Jacob Turner kept his eyes forward, jaw tight as stone. Father and son had ridden in silence since dawn, through hills that had once been theirs, and now, soon, would belong to someone else. You didn't have to sell it, Elias rasped through the wind. That land's been in our blood for 3 generations. Jacob didn't answer. The only sound was the creak of the saddles and the moan of the storm. You think that gold's gonna buy you peace, boy? It won't, Elias pressed, voice cracking. I tell you better than this. Jacob finally turned, his face flushed with cold and fury. You taught me to scrape and starve while you watched everything die. That ranch was a graveyard, pay, and you were already digging yours before I touched a shovel. The words hit harder than the wind. Elias blinked against the snow, trying to make sense of the son he'd raised, a boy once gentle, who now spoke like a stranger. They reached a ridge where the wind screamed louder and the horses balked. The sky had turned a bruised gray, the kind that promised no mercy. Jacob stopped, dismounted, and walked to Elias's horse. This is where we part, he said quietly. Elias frowned. What are you talking about? Jacob's eyes were strange, cold, distant. You can't keep up. You'll die out here trying to get home. I'll send help from town. Town's 20 miles off, and you ain't sending nobody, Elias growled. You're leaving me, aren't you? Jacob hesitated, his breath a white ghost in the air. I'm sorry, Pa, he whispered, and then, before Elias could speak, he struck the horse hard on the flank. The old man tumbled into the snow, gasping as the cold bit deep. His horse bolted into the storm. By the time Elias staggered to his knees, Jacob was already on his own horse, disappearing into the white blur. Jacob! Elias shouted, his voice torn away by the wind. Jacob, come back. There was no answer, only the endless hiss of snow. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. His hands, thick and cracked from years of work, sank into the drift. He could barely feel his fingers. The world tilted, and he fell backward, half buried in the snow. He lay there, chest heaving, eyes staring up at the gray sky. The wind piled snow on his coat, on his face, on his memories. Through the haze of cold, he saw his boy again, not the man who just left him, but the child who used to ride the fence line beside him, laughing as the sun burned over the prairie. He remembered the smell of the cattle, the sound of boots and dust, the small voice that once said, I'll always be here, Pa. Now the same voice was gone. The cold deepened, crawling up his spine like claws. He tried to roll over, but his limbs no longer obeyed. The wind grew faint. The snow muffled everything, even his heartbeat. Maybe this was how it ended, he thought. Not with gunfire or glory, but with silence and snow. He closed his eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Then, for a long while, there was nothing. Hours passed. Night came down like a curtain. The moon rose faint and pale, its light spilling over the endless white. Beneath it, a small shape moved along the ridge, a flicker of motion. Silent and sure it was not Jacob returning. 2 riders emerged from the storm, their horses low to the ground, their faces hidden behind furs and feathers. One was a man, tall and bareheaded despite the cold, his long black hair trailing behind him. The other, a woman, guided her horse closer, her eyes scanning the snow with quiet intensity. She saw the faint outline, a hand, half buried in the drift. Chayton, she whispered. The man turned, saw it too. Without a word, he dismounted, brushing snow away until the frozen face of Elias Turner appeared. His skin blue, his lips still. The woman pressed her fingers to his neck. Faint, but there, he breathes, she said softly. Chayton looked toward the storm's edge, then back to her. Then he is not meant to die tonight. Together they began to dig. Chayton worked silently, his breath misting in the cold as he scooped snow away from the old man's body. His bare arms flexed with every motion, the beads and bones of his jewelry rattling faintly against his chest. Beside him, Nayeli tore a strip from her fur wrap and pressed it to Elias Turner's mouth, trying to feel for life. He's freezing from the inside, she murmured, voice low and urgent. If we don't move now, he'll fade before dawn. Chayton nodded once. Without another word, he lifted the old man in his arms like a fallen brother. The wind bit into his skin, snow clinging to his long black hair, but he carried the burden as though it were nothing more than an oath. Nayeli led the way through the white blur, her horse plowing a narrow path down the ridge toward their hidden camp. The world was nothing but wind and ice. Elias's head lolled against Chayton's shoulder, his face ghostly. Each step was a battle. But the Apache man pressed on, his deep voice whispering under the storm. Words in his tongue, not meant for the living or the dead, but for the spirits that ruled the night. When they reached the valley below, a small circle of rock offered shelter from the blizzard. Smoke drifted faintly from a hollow in the cliffside, their winter camp. Chayton ducked inside with Elias in his arms. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of burning sage and pine resin. Nayeli stoked the fire higher, sparks dancing into the shadows. Lay him close, she said softly. We must draw the cold out before the dawn. Chayton lowered Elias onto a bed of hides near the fire. His body was stiff, his fingers curled like claws. Nayeli worked quickly, stripping away his frozen coat and boots, wrapping him in furs. She pressed her palms against his chest, feeling for the faint thump of life. He is strong, she said finally, her dark eyes glancing toward her husband. Too strong to die without purpose. Chayton knelt beside her, watching the pale man who had fallen into their world like a ghost. The spirits led us to him, he said. Maybe for his sake. Or ours. Outside, the storm wailed like a grieving mother. Inside, the only sound was the crackle of fire and the slow, rasping breath of the man between life and death. Hours passed. Nayeli brewed a mixture of herbs, pressing the warm liquid to Elias's lips. Most of it spilled down his beard, but a little reached his tongue. He coughed weakly, a sound so small it could have been mistaken for the wind. There, Nayeli whispered. He fights. Elias drifted in and out of darkness. In his fevered mind, he saw shapes, faces he couldn't name. A horse running through sunlight, a boy laughing before vanishing into snow. He felt warmth on his chest, a soft voice speaking in a language he didn't understand. He opened his eyes. At first, all he saw was fire-orange light flickering across stone walls. Then, a woman's face came into focus. Copper skin, high cheekbones, dark eyes filled with both strength and sorrow. Behind her, a man sat silent, his expression carved in patience. Elias tried to speak, but his throat cracked like dry earth. Nayeli leaned forward and placed a finger on his lips. Do not speak yet, she said gently. The storm is still inside you. He blinked, confused, the words heavy in his mind. His last memory was the ridge, Jacob's voice fading into the storm. The fall, his chest burned with the memory. Where am I? He rasped. In shelter, Nayeli replied, feeding another log to the fire. You were found in the snow. The spirits did not take you. Chayton rose and handed Elias a cup of warm broth. Drink, he said simply. The night has no mercy, but we do. Elias took the cup with trembling hands, feeling heat return to his body for the first time. He looked between them, two strangers who had saved him when his own blood had abandoned him. "Why? Why'd you help me?" he whispered. Nayeli's eyes softened. "Because no one deserves to die alone," she said. The fire crackled louder, throwing light against the cave walls. Outside, the storm began to fade, its cries growing weaker in the distance. Elias leaned back, exhaustion overtaking him again. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered to the flames, not sure if he spoke to God or to the spirits these people believed in. "Thank you." Nayeli looked to her husband, who watched the dying fire with a knowing calm. "He will live," she said. Chaitin nodded slowly. "Then his story has not ended. Not yet." Outside, the storm lifted at last, revealing a cold and silent dawn over Broken Mesa. But inside the small firelit cave, warmth had returned, and with it, the first fragile breath of redemption. Elias Turner awoke to the crackling sound of the fire. The scent of smoke and herbs hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, he didn't know where he was, only that the world was warm again and he could breathe. The last thing he remembered was the snow closing in, the sound of his son's horse fading into nothingness. When he tried to sit up, a firm but gentle hand pressed him back down. It was Nayeli. She looked at him the way one might look at a wounded animal, wary but kind. "You moved too soon," she said softly. "Your blood is still thick with cold." Elias blinked, the firelight reflecting in his pale eyes. "I thought I was dead." Nayeli offered a faint smile. The snow tried. It failed. From the other side of the fire, Chaitin sat cross-legged, silent as stone. His long black hair glowed in the light, and his tribal beads shimmered with each movement. He had the presence of a mountain, unmoving, but watching everything. Elias's throat felt raw. "You're Apache?" He croaked. Chaitin inclined his head slightly, not offended, not confirming, just acknowledging. "You saved me," Elias muttered, glancing at the bandages on his arms and chest. "After all this land's taken from your people, you still saved me." "The snow takes all men the same," Chaitin replied finally, his deep voice echoing softly through the cave. "It does not ask who owns the land." Elias stared into the flames, the words settling deep inside him. His life had been spent fighting for property, boundaries, fences, things that meant nothing in the face of death. Nayeli poured warm tea from a clay pot and handed him a cup. "Drink this. It will help your heart remember how to be strong." He took a slow sip. It was bitter but soothing, warmth spreading through his body. For the first time in days, he felt alive. Outside, the storm had passed. Only the faint hiss of melting snow dripped from the rocks. "How long have I been here?" Elias asked. 2 days, Nayeli answered. "You were buried deep. We thought you would not wake." Elias nodded weakly. 2 days? He stared at his trembling hands. "My son. Jacob, he left me up there." Nayeli's gaze softened. The man who leaves his blood in the storm is not free from the cold. It follows him. Chaitin's eyes lifted from the fire. A man who forgets his father is already lost. Elias swallowed hard. "He said he'd send help," he murmured, voice breaking. "But I reckon he never meant to." The cave fell silent except for the fire. The truth hung there, heavy, unspoken. Elias rubbed his face, ashamed of the tears he felt building. "Maybe I failed him first. Maybe he learned coldness from me." Nayeli's hand touched his shoulder lightly. "The snow does not care for blame. It only teaches what warmth is worth." Elias looked at her. This woman, half his age, yet speaking with the weight of ages. There was something in her calm, something that reminded him of his late wife, that same quiet strength that never needed to shout to be heard. He looked at Chaitin. "You two live out here alone?" We live where the land remembers us, Chaitin said simply. There are no fences, no laws, only the wind and what it carries. Naeli smiled faintly. Sometimes it carries lost souls. Elias managed a weak laugh. Then I guess I was one of them. You still are, Chaitin said, stirring the fire with a stick. But not forever. The flames flared higher, lighting the cave walls with dancing shadows, shapes that looked like spirits moving in the glow. Elias stared at them, feeling something strange stir within him. Not fear, not sorrow. Something like humility. He realized that he owed his life not to his son's mercy, nor to luck, but to two strangers the world had taught him to mistrust. And that knowledge burned deeper than the fire itself. As the night deepened, Naeli began humming, a soft tune in her language, ancient and low, like the earth's heartbeat. Elias closed his eyes, letting the sound wrap around him. Chaitin added more wood to the fire. Sleep now, old one, he said quietly. Tomorrow your spirit will be stronger. Elias nodded slowly. His body was weary, but his heart. It had started to thaw. As sleep took him, he whispered, Thank you, both of you. Naeli and Chaitin exchanged a quiet glance. Do not thank us yet, she said softly. The hardest road is not the one through snow, it is the one back to forgiveness. The flames flickered lower as the wind outside whispered across the mesa, carrying with it the first promise of morning. The dawn light crept slowly into the cave, spilling across the stone floor like liquid gold. Elias Turner stirred beneath the firs, his breath visible in the cool morning air. The fire had burned low during the night, but its warmth still lingered, mingling with the faint scent of herbs and smoke. For a moment, he just lay there listening to the soft murmur of the wind outside, to the gentle crackle of embers, and to the quiet rhythm of two people moving about their lives. Naeli was kneeling near the entrance, grinding dried roots into powder. Chaitin stood beyond her, bare to the waist, his muscular frame outlined by the pale morning light filtering through the cave mouth. He was sharpening a knife on a stone, his long black hair falling in a curtain down his back, his tribal jewelry glinting faintly. Elias watched them silently. He felt like an intruder in a sacred place, a ghost trespassing among the living. When Naeli noticed him awake, she offered a small smile. You sleep long, she said. That is good. The body heals when the mind rests. Elias tried to sit up, groaning as the stiffness in his limbs fought him. Didn't think I'd ever wake at all, he muttered. You were close to the other side, Naeli said, mixing her herbs. But the spirits weren't ready for you yet. Chaitin sheathed his knife and approached. Eat, he said simply, placing a bowl of cooked beans and dried venison near Elias. Elias nodded in gratitude. You folks have done more for me than anyone's done in a long time. He looked down at his trembling hands. More than my own kin. Chaitin's eyes met his, deep, dark, and unreadable. Blood does not always mean kindness, he said. Elias stared into the fire. No, it don't. The silence stretched, filled only by the popping of embers. Then, as if the weight inside him could no longer be held, Elias spoke. My boy, Jacob. He left me up there to die. Naeli stopped stirring her herbs. Her face softened with quiet sorrow. Why? Because I wasn't the man I should have been, Elias said, his voice rough. Spent years running this ranch, working the land, fighting for every inch of it. Thought I was doing right by him, teaching him to be tough, to survive. But I reckon all I taught him was how to be hard. He hated me for it. He paused, rubbing his eyes. After his ma passed, I didn't know how to talk to him anymore. We both turned to stone, me from guilt, him from anger. When that land deal came around, he wanted to sell. I said no. Said a man ought to keep what his father built. We fought. Next thing I know, he's ridden away, and I'm sinking in snow up to my neck." The words broke something loose inside him, something old and buried. The confession filled the cave with heavy air, like smoke that wouldn't clear. Naeli's voice was gentle. "Sometimes, the ones we love must break us so we remember we can still feel." Chayton crouched beside the fire, adding a branch to the flames. "A father's heart and a son's pride, both strong, both blind," he said. "You cannot change the storm that has already passed, but you can walk through what comes after." Elias nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "Maybe so. I just wish I'd told him I was proud. Even once." Naeli glanced at her husband, then back at the old man. "Maybe you still can." Elias looked up, confused. She pointed toward the light spilling into the cave. "The snow melts. The path's open. If you still have breath, you still have a chance to speak what your soul carries." The idea felt impossible, yet something about her words sparked a fragile hope. Chayton stood, his expression unreadable. "When the sun falls low again, I will take you to the trail that leads to your valley. If the boy has gone to town, you will find his tracks." Elias blinked, surprised. "You do that for me?" Chayton nodded. A man saved by another's mercy should not waste his second sunrise. Elias swallowed hard. He looked at the two of them, these strangers who had risked the cold to save a man they didn't know. He thought of all the years he'd spent distrusting people like them, believing the lies the world had taught him. Now they were the only reason he still drew breath. "Maybe I don't deserve it," he murmured. Naeli's voice was calm. "Deserving has nothing to do with it. The fire burns for anyone willing to come close." Elias stared into the flames again, the light flickering across his weathered face. Somewhere deep inside, the ice around his heart began to crack. Outside, the snow dripped steadily from the rocks, each drop marking the slow return of life. The wind howled outside the cave like a spirit mourning the dead. The storm had rolled in from the north, carrying with it a cold so bitter that even the fire inside struggled to hold its ground. Talon, the Apache warrior, crouched by the flames, feeding it bits of dry wood and sagebrush, his broad chest glistening faintly with sweat from the effort. His long black hair, unbound now, cascaded over his shoulders as he stared at the sparks leaping upward like restless souls. Beside the fire, Elise stirred weakly. Her cheeks were pale, her lips cracked from thirst, but her eyes fluttered open when the scent of cooked venison reached her nose. Talon knelt by her side, holding a wooden bowl filled with broth he'd made from roots and rabbit. "Drink," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "It will give you strength." She tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. Talon placed a steadying hand on her back, supporting her gently but firmly. The warmth of his touch startled her. He was both wild and careful, as though he feared breaking something fragile. Elise sipped the broth, her eyes never leaving his face. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. "After what my people did to yours." Talon's jaw tightened. He looked away toward the cave mouth, where snow still fell thick and relentless. "Hatred feeds nothing but graves," he said. "I've buried too many." His words lingered like smoke. She lowered her gaze, ashamed. Across the fire, the old man Jonas, her father, watched in silence. His eyes were clouded, heavy with regret. "Your people were wrong, Talon," he said hoarsely. "I was wrong. We came here thinking we could tame the land. But we only broke what we didn't understand." Talon didn't answer at first. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing. "Understanding comes too late for most," he said finally. "But not for all." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly. The storm wasn't letting up, and Talon knew they would need more firewood before nightfall. He rose to his full height, tall, strong, and silent as a mountain. He reached for his spear and bow. I will return before sundown, he said. Stay by the fire. Do not leave the cave. Elise reached out, touching his arm. It's dangerous out there. The storm. He looked down at her, a faint hint of a smile flickering in his eyes. I was born in storms. And then he was gone. Hours passed. The wind screamed through the cliffs, carrying the sound of breaking branches and distant wolves. Elise tended the fire as best she could, wrapping her father in more furs when his shivering grew worse. But worry gnawed at her. Every gust that rattled the cave mouth felt like a warning. When the storm finally began to calm, a shadow appeared at the entrance broad shoulders, long hair whipping in the wind. Talon returned, his arms heavy with firewood, snow crusted on his skin. He was breathing hard, but his expression was composed. Until Elise saw the blood. Talon, she gasped, rushing forward. There was a gash along his side, shallow but bleeding. He waved her off, but she wouldn't listen. You're hurt, she said firmly, tearing a strip from her own blanket. Sit, now. He hesitated, then obeyed, sitting near the fire. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned the wound with melted snow, her eyes flicking to his face. He didn't flinch, not even once. You saved us, she murmured. And still you protect us. Talon looked at her quietly. You would have done the same. Elise shook her head. I don't think I would have, she whispered. Not before this. The silence between them deepened, no longer empty but full of something new: respect, maybe, or the fragile beginnings of trust. Jonas stirred from his corner, his voice weak but clear. Perhaps mercy is the last true strength left in this world, he said. Talon met his eyes and nodded once. Then let it begin here, he said. Outside, the storm had broken. The clouds began to part, revealing slivers of stars. Inside the cave, firelight flickered across 3 faces, each marked by pain, yet somehow, for the first time, at peace. And as Elise's hand brushed against Talon's while she wrapped the cloth tighter around his wound, neither pulled away. The world outside might still be cruel and cold, but in that cave, beneath the watch of the eternal desert sky, something warm and unspoken had begun to live again. When dawn broke, it came slow and gray through the veil of fog that rolled down from the mountains. The fire in the cave had burned low, its coals pulsing like a weary heart. Talon stirred first, rising from where he had sat watch through the night. His breath came in white plumes, and his skin, bare from the waist up, gleamed faintly in the new light. The bandage that Elise had tied around his side had turned brown with dried blood. But he didn't seem to mind. Elise awoke to find him kneeling by the old man, checking his pulse with care that seemed almost unnatural for a warrior of his kind. Jonas was breathing more easily now. The color had returned to his face, though his eyes stayed closed. You didn't sleep, she said softly. Talon turned toward her. Sleep can wait, he replied. The snow will not. She frowned, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. What do you mean? He stood and pointed toward the cave's mouth. If the river freezes again, the valley will close. We'll be trapped here for weeks. Your father will not survive that. The reality struck her like a hammer. Then what do we do? We move, Talon said simply. There's a hunter's cabin 2 days south where the mountain breaks. Warmth, food, safety. Elise's heart raced. He can't walk that far. Talon looked at her with calm determination. Then I will carry him. She stared at him, this man who owed them nothing, who had every reason to turn away, and yet he was ready to risk his life for them. Her throat tightened. Why? She whispered. Why go through all this for us? He met her eyes, and for a long moment the cave was silent except for the crackle of dying fire. Because once, long ago, someone carried me, he said. and I did not forget. By midday, they began the journey. The snow had hardened into crusted layers, crunching beneath Talon's boots as he lifted Jonas carefully across his shoulders. The old man murmured weakly, still half-conscious. Elise walked beside them, clutching a bundle of furs and what little food they had left. The wind had softened, but the cold was sharper than ever. Frost clung to Elise's eyelashes, and her feet ached from the endless climb. Still, she pressed on, her eyes drawn constantly to the man walking ahead, strong, steady, a dark figure against the endless white. Hours passed before they reached a stretch of frozen river. Talon lowered Jonas gently onto a bed of furs and studied the sky. "Storm coming," he said grimly. "We must hurry." But Elise stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her. Talon was beside her in an instant, helping her to her feet. His hand lingered on her arm longer than it needed to. Their eyes met hers, full of exhaustion, his full of silent resolve. "I can't," she whispered, trembling. "Yes, you can," he said, voice like flint. "The mountain wants to see what you're made of. Don't let it win." Something in his tone reignited her will. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Then let's move." They pressed on until dusk, when the wind rose again, howling between the cliffs. Talon spotted a hollow beneath an overhang, a shallow cave. "We stay here tonight," he said. "No further." Elise collapsed to her knees, too tired to protest. Talon set Jonas down, covering him with every fur they had left. Then he began to build a fire, his hand steady even as the cold bit at him. When the flames finally leapt to life, Elise reached for his side. The wound she had tended before had begun to bleed again. "You're pushing too hard," she said softly. He looked down at her, the light flickering across his face. "A wound reminds you you're alive," he said with a faint smirk. She shook her head, wrapping the cloth tighter. "Or that you can still die," she whispered back. Their eyes met again, closer now, firelight painting warmth between them. For a moment, the howling wind outside faded into nothing. Then Jonas stirred weakly, whispering words neither of them expected. "You saved me." His voice trembled, barely audible. "I left you to die. In the snow. My own sin came for me." Talon's expression softened. "That day is gone," he said gently. "Let it die there." Jonas reached for his hand. "You forgive too easily." "No," Talon said, his voice steady as stone. "I forgive because I refuse to hate again." Elise's eyes filled with tears as she looked at them, two men bound by pain and redemption under the same cold sky. Outside, the storm raged again, but inside the cave, something had shifted. The snow could bury their tracks, but not what they had become. Three souls crossing the thin line between vengeance and grace. And for the first time since the long winter began, Elise felt hope stir like fire in her chest. By the time the first golden light of dawn touched the peaks, the group had descended far enough to see the valley below. It was a narrow strip of land nestled between cliffs, dotted with patches of frozen river and trees heavy with snow. Talon paused, setting Jonas gently on a bed of furs he had spread beneath a rock overhang. The old man shivered, not from the cold now, but from the weight of everything he had carried for years. "Here," Talon said, voice calm but firm. "This is as far as the mountain takes us safely. The cabin lies beyond the next ridge." Elise knelt beside her father, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Can you make it a little farther?" she asked gently, worry etched across her face. Jonas nodded weakly. "I have to," he murmured. "I need to see it through." With careful planning, Talon lifted him again, this time with Elise walking close, ready to support at a moment's notice. The snow was thinner now, the ground firmer, but the climb remained treacherous. Every step was a negotiation with gravity and frost, yet Talon moved steadily, unwavering, as if he had been born to bear burdens like this. Hours passed. The wind was less biting now, replaced by a quiet hush broken only by the occasional cracking of frozen branches. Talon's shadow stretched long across the valley floor, and Elise's gaze followed him constantly, silently acknowledging his strength and the patience that tempered it. Finally, the cabin appeared, a small wooden structure, smoke curling gently from its chimney. Talon set Jonas down on the threshold, kneeling beside him. The old man's hands trembled as he touched the wood, a mix of relief and disbelief in his eyes. "You've done it," Elise whispered, tears running down her cheeks. Jonas's voice was hoarse, almost a whisper. We made it." He looked at Talon, his gaze searching. "I left your people with hatred, Talon. Years ago, I thought revenge and pride would protect me. But I was blind. You saved me, even after what I did to you." Talon's eyes softened. He reached out, placing a steady hand on Jonas's shoulder. "The snow does not remember who threw the first stone," he said quietly. "It only cares for those who walk through it with honesty. You walked. You are here. That is enough." Jonas blinked, tears mingling with frost on his beard. "Enough?" "Yes," Talon said. "Enough to begin again, to speak the words that have been trapped too long." Elise looked between the two men, understanding stirring in her heart. She had witnessed the miracle of survival, the grace of mercy, and now she saw the opening of long-sealed wounds. Jonas swallowed hard. "Talon, I am sorry. I never should have." His words faltered, broken by emotion. Talon placed a hand over the old man's, steadying him. "Speak it," he said softly. I wronged you," Jonas whispered. "I wronged your people. My pride blinded me. My son left me to die, and I almost let him." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of decades. Talon studied him, then gave a faint nod. "Then the past is laid down. Do not pick it up again." For a long moment, all that could be heard was the distant whisper of wind and the crackle of smoke from the cabin's chimney. Then Elise stepped forward, brushing snow from Talon's shoulder. "We made it," she said simply, the truth of the statement sinking in. Talon glanced at her, a small, rare smile flickering across his face. "Yes," he said. "We made it." Jonas's eyes softened. He looked around at the valley, the frozen trees, the river glinting faintly under the rising sun, the small cabin that promised warmth and safety. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of guilt lessen. He had been given a second chance, carried through snow and storm by those he had never known, guided by the strength of a man who could have hated him but didn't. The three of them entered the cabin together. The warmth hit them immediately, and firelight glowed in the hearth. Talon fed the wood into the flames, while Elise helped Jonas settle on a bed of furs. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft and quiet now, covering the valley in a white blanket that seemed almost sacred. Jonas closed his eyes for the first time in years without fear. I will make this right," he whispered. "Starting now." Talon and Elise shared a quiet glance, the kind of look that held unspoken understanding. The world outside could remain cruel, cold, and unforgiving, but inside this cabin, among firelight and the quiet snow, something new had begun: redemption, mercy, and the fragile promise of hope. And as the valley lay silent under the morning sun, the three of them sat together, survivors of storm and betrayal, each one carrying the weight of the past lightly now, ready for whatever dawn might bring.